And the way we have this set up is it features the speaker when the recording is happening. So if people have their mics on and there are random noises, it'll flip to your screen and you might wonder why all of a sudden your name showed up in the video.
What?
We got the thing up and running.
Oh, good.
So
like that.
is it John? Could we have you mute your microphone?
They must have left it off.
Here, let me see if I can mute for him. Yes, there we go. Okay. And I don't know if people are getting kicked out. We're having to put people back in again. We're having technical difficulties tonight, it seems. This isn't as bad as the night.
According to the mediums of this age, this would have been caused by Houdini's tampering with the forces of beyond. And so the spirits may not be with us, according to the psychics of the time. It could be those are the gremlins that are pursuing us tonight. A tradition established by Houdini.
I think that's as good of an explanation as anything.
There you go.
So we are really thrilled to have the 5th of our book talks. Our theme this year is History's Real Action Figures. And we have been featuring book talks since November on the different scholars talking about their characters. And tonight we finish things off with Larry Bounds. And this is the first time we've had Larry as a part of Ashland Chautauqua's troupe, but Larry has a wealth of Chautauqua experience. He is the chair of the board of directors for Greenville, Chautauqua. And if any of you are familiar with our programming over the years, George Frine and Larry go way back because George was kind of the founder of Greenville, Chautauqua. So it's really wonderful to make this kind of this connection between the two Chautauquas from work that we've all been doing. They're a year ahead of us in terms of their anniversary, but we're really glad to have Larry here. He
just made it, just edged him out, just barely.
He told me the other day that this is his 50th year as a magician. So he's been doing his magician work longer than he's been doing his Houdini work. But I'm going to turn things over and let him give you a little bit of an overview, even if you haven't read the book. And then we'll open things up for questions. So you can put your questions in the chat and we'll hold off until he's done. And then we can have a lively discussion about Houdini. So I'll turn it over to you, Larry.
Thank you very much. My wife thought it would be a great idea to start the show off in chains and demonstrate one of Houdini's clever escape techniques, taking, for example, a key that could be obtained somehow, and then, of course, you can't really reach it. Maybe this wasn't such a good idea after all. I'm sorry. So let's go on with our introduction to tonight's presentation. It's about a book called Houdini, The Life and Afterlife of Houdini. And if memory serves me correctly, it was one of many books I had to choose from. The wonderful folks at Ashland Chautauqua told me that I could pick the book for this reading, and I wanted something fairly contemporary, though when I looked through my library, the first book that struck my eye was this one from Milburn Christopher. It's called Houdini, A Pictorial Life. And for a coffee table book, it was just filled with illustrations from the life of Houdini. And I thought that would be interesting to see. It was published in 1976. And I realized there were a great many Houdini books published in 1976 because it was the 50th anniversary of the death of Harry Houdini. And therefore, a lot of publishers had the same idea. This was produced by a well-known magician by the name of Milburn Christopher, though his status as a magician, I think, is better served as his status of a writer about Houdini. And they not only published this book from him, but they republished The Untold Story. This came from a few years before Milburn Christopher wrote Houdini, The Untold Story, which is considered the first more historic, less fanciful version of the life of Harry Houdini. The books in the 1920s and the 1930s and the 40s, even into the 50s and the early 60s, those books all tended to repeat the stories that made Houdini famous, many of which were the stories that Houdini made up. This was more of a somewhat scholarly account, and it was one of the first to really bring forth that discussion of where was Houdini born. Houdini, of course, always claimed to have been born and raised in Appleton, Wisconsin. But according to here, he was born and raised in Budapest, Hungary, a slight geographical difference. And so the debate went on. Another book from 1976 is by Walter Gibson. And I wouldn't want to talk about Houdini without at least mentioning Walter Gibson, one of my favorite guys to read. Walter Gibson worked with Houdini. This book, the original Houdini scrapbook, is once again a pictorial guide with some materials that you wouldn't normally see in a text on Houdini. It was produced for a mass reading audience in 1976. Walter Gibson worked closely with Houdini. In fact, the books that I'm not going to be showing are books by Houdini, many of which were actually books by Walter Gibson, who was a ghostwriter for Houdini. Gibson was also very famous for producing his books on baseball. He was one of America's leading authorities on baseball. And the famous line, "Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men? The shadow knows." Written by Walter Gibson, the creator of one of America's first superheroes, the Shadow. So Walter Gibson, a wonderful, wonderful fellow, and I've learned a lot over the years reading from his books. There's a book that I wanted to show you that is interesting when one is thinking about Houdini. It's about Houdini thinking, and this is Houdini, A Mind in Chains, a psychoanalytical portrait. This was from a time period when doing psychoanalysis of people who were not around to actually lay on a couch was very popular. I think science has proven that if you can't really get a firm handle on somebody, meeting with them day after day, personally listening to their stories and questioning them, then maybe the accuracy of a psychoanalytical portrait taken from scraps from other people's memories is maybe not the most scientifically valid. However, there are things about Houdini in this book that I have not seen in other books before. Some things, well, let's just say they're interesting in a dark kind of way. This is the book by Ken Silverman that is probably considered the !1 reference source for the life of Houdini. Houdini with 3 exclamation points, because if no one else does, Houdini deserves 3 exclamation points. This is the great America's self-liberator, Europe's eclipsing sensation, the world's handcuffed king and prison breaker. Nothing on earth can hold Houdini a prisoner. How's that for a subtitle? But this work, once again, is a wonderful, historic, very carefully pieced together work on the life and legacy of Harry Houdini, and certainly worth any serious student's time and attention. Another book, slightly more recent than that one, is Houdini, The Making of America's First Superhero, which is in perfect keeping with our theme, superheroes, American superheroes, or action figures. This one is the one that introduced that interesting suggestion that perhaps Houdini was not only a great showman, but that Houdini may have worked as a spy for the American and the British governments in the days leading up to World War I. A very interesting thought. This book, my wife gave me as a present for a birthday, and I was unaware of this book, but she somehow found it. This was the official guide to an exhibit at the American Jewish Museum, where they did the art and magic of Harry Houdini. And it is filled with not only stories of Houdini in great detail about his New York roots, but it's also filled with art that was inspired by various media artists all over the country, all over the decades, the 100 years since his death, well, nearly 100 years since his death, that come from Houdini, that were inspired by Houdini. It's a fabulous volume. It's not as easy to find this as it used to be, but it's a wonderful source of material. There are much more user-friendly versions, of course, such as this from the Center for Cartoon Studies. It is basically a graphic novel featuring Houdini and one of his famous escapes, the bridge jump that he popularized. And so highly accessible to any readers. And now I'll stop my list and get on to tonight's book. I do want to mention one other text that is significant, though it's not about Houdini at all, which he might object to. This is the memoirs of Robert Houdin, the king of the conjurers. This is the book that even the least romanticized stories of Houdini say got him started on his path to stardom.
This meeting is being recorded.
This would be the book about a famous French magician, Jean-Robert Houdin.
Okay.
Larry, we lost your audio. I'm not sure
He's
how.
muted.
Oh, there we go.
He's muted.
Yeah. Can you unmute? Can we unmute you? See if I can unmute you. I can ask you.
Am I back?
There, you're back.
I'm back.
You're
Okay.
back.
Well,
You're back.
I don't know how much you heard of this, but the memoir of Jean-Robert Houdin. Houdini read this book as a young man. He had a friend, Jacob Hyman, that recommended it to him. He read this book and fell in love with this almost mythical, actual, but seemingly mythical French magician who did these amazing tricks and illusions, opened his own magic theater, served as an agent for the French government in North Africa, helping to stop a rebellion by using magic tricks, all kinds of things in this adventure tale, based on the true life of Jean-Robert Houdin. In fact, I noticed when I was flipping through it, I forgot I had this. Here is a postcard from his hometown that was stamped with Jean-Robert Houdin's stamp and postmarked on the anniversary of the 100th year of his death. I figured it made the best possible bookmark. Anyway, the book that got Houdini started is certainly worth a read. And the book that Houdini would later come to despise so much that he wrote a counter argument for the entire text. Not to be outdone. And of course, the man's name is Houdin. When Eric Weiss took the name Houdini, he thought if you're Houdini, you are like Houdin. You know, like if you're smart, you're a smarty. If you're Houdin, you're Houdini. And that was the origin of the name originally. So there, a look at some other texts that you might also enjoy reading. But tonight we're here to talk about the life and afterlife of Harry Houdini.
Can I interrupt for just a second and tell people?
Yes.
That was a lot of books. We are going to send a follow-up email tomorrow, and we are going to have that list. So if you were frantically trying to write those down, Larry has provided a whole list for us. Don't worry. Okay.
Good. So the reason I picked this book, besides it's from 2019, so it's a really relevant contemporary information about Houdini, but I also like this book in that it covers Houdini in a unique way that none of the other books do. It's like a tapestry. I will create this image, if I may. This book is a tapestry, a beautiful picture woven of the life of Houdini, beginning in the early days of his life, taking us through his youth, taking us to his eventual death and even beyond. But woven all through this tapestry is this web of golden threads of other characters. Now, I've read reviews of the book that say that's a disadvantage, that the threads of these different people whose lives were shaped in large part by their interest in Houdini, that's where the book tends to perhaps lose a little interest. And when it gets back to more about Houdini, it becomes more interesting. But I disagree. I think it's very clever how the dozens of other people that are listed in this book, whether they are famous magicians or magical writers or historians or artists, how their lives have intersected with the life of Harry Houdini, providing Houdini with the afterlife that the book advertises. And I think that's wonderfully, cleverly done throughout the book. I also like the way he starts it. You know, like a good movie where a James Bond movie where you have this action scene at the very beginning to set the pace, and then you get the story. Well, this book begins with an action scene in a theater where Houdini's on stage, and he has been told that the heavyweight champion of the world is up in the balcony watching his show. And Houdini, in an act of graciousness, invites this fellow to come down onto the stage and join him and help with the magic. And the guy basically tells him to get lost, which from all accounts, one should not do with Harry Houdini. So Houdini becomes nicer and asks the fellow to come down. And then when he realizes he's getting a brush off and the guy calls him a name, he decides, Jess Willard or not Willard, he's going to put him in his place. And so in one masterful, one or two phrases to the audience, he turns the entire audience against the heavyweight champion. You know, the heavyweight champion saying, come on up here, I'll fight you. And Houdini doesn't have to resort to that. He just turns the entire audience against Willard and basically drives Willard out of the theater with the cat calls from the audience. He has the audience in the palm of his hand. And that, I thought, was a great way to start the life of Houdini, a man who would bear no insult and a man who could control and manipulate audiences to achieve what he thought was his due. And that, even though there's a lot of discussions in here about his technical skill as a conjurer, his technical skills as a magician, as a card master and all that, I think everyone agrees that though Houdini could at times be, shall I kindly say, a bit trying to others around him, that he also was a masterful reader of people and audiences, a man whose persona could reach out and bring people in. Imagine a fellow who's, when chained up, now we are familiar with escapes he's done that we have seen and we've seen depicted in movies. We've perhaps gone on YouTube and seen videos. There are, by the way, I'll mention several videos that are out there. Many of them, the copyright ended a long time ago. Here's a movie, The Master Mystery, where he plays a detective. Here's a movie where he's lost on a desert island called Terror Island. Here's a movie called The Man from Beyond, where Houdini is frozen on an Arctic exploration and resuscitated 100 years later. It's one of the few chances you have to see Houdini stripped naked and dressed in a fur diaper. It's not things that you normally see a performer doing. And these films, I believe, are all available. There's another one that's been relatively recently fixed and upgraded and refurbished, called The Grim Game. I have not yet seen that one, but I'm looking forward to seeing The Grim Game, which is maybe his greatest picture. Certainly had one of his most interesting stories where it actually catches the part of a plane crash as they were filming the action scenes, and it becomes part of the movie. Anyway, there's lots to see, lots to hear, lots to read about Houdini, and I thought this book captured it wonderfully. I was fortunate to know several of the people in here, crossed paths with quite a few of them over the years. By way of a little bit about my own background, as was mentioned, I've been doing, this is the 50th anniversary this year, this spring rather, is the 50th anniversary of me performing as a professional magician. I first performed as a magician. I was hired to do it beyond a 10-year-old's hobby. I was hired right out of high school by the Ripley Corporation. While I attended college at the University of Tennessee, Ripley's had opened a magic shop in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, as part of the Museum of Witchcraft and Magic. And I was hired by Ron Conley to be one of their demonstrators that second year they were open. And then I worked with Ripley's for the next 8 years, performing in Gatlinburg and in Myrtle Beach, and working with some wonderful magicians there on the Ripley staff and the Abracadabra Theater that they established. The people that I met through that include Doug Henning, who's mentioned in the book. I met him backstage at his theater at the Court Theater when he was doing his Broadway show, with a letter of introduction from Ron, who had taught him when he was a kid in a magic shop. I've had the honor of appearing on stage with Doug Henning as a volunteer from the audience assistant, as well as with some of the other fairly big names in magic. And when I was selling magic, I'm happy to say that there was a 12 and 13-year-old boy that used to come to our shop in Gatlinburg and buy tricks and look forward to being a big star someday, by the name of Lance Burton, who has done fairly well for himself over the years as a magician in Las Vegas and on television shows. All names that pop up in this text, people whose lives are intertwined with that of Harry Houdini. Now, for me, and this is something else mentioned in the book, one of the first big Houdini moments for me, other than finding the untold story in a library when I was maybe 10, 12 years old and reading the story of Houdini there, was seeing the 1953 movie Houdini, starring Janet Leigh and Tony Curtis. And for a lot of people, the Tony Curtis movie, Tony Curtis as Houdini, stands out. When I am performing the Houdini show, where I create a miniature version of his 3-act show that he did, the question and answer, as part of Chautauqua, we always have a question and answer section. And the questions for Houdini, especially when I'm out of character, because Houdini wouldn't have known about a movie produced in 1953, but the questions I get often revolve around that movie. I mean, that's a 70-year-old movie, but it's still influencing people today. I mean, it's got Tony Curtis, it's got Janet Leigh. What's not to like about it? Well, actually, as a Houdini scholar, there's really a lot to not like about it. But it captures the romance. It captures the excitement that is Harry Houdini. This book also ponders the questions about the life of Houdini. And I think it's marvelous that here's a man internationally known. He was considered even a superstar at the turn of the last century, a superstar in Japan in the 1920s, when he's making movies and they're being shown around the world. He's getting tons of fan mail from Japan, where he's, a superhero. Here's a fellow who just inspired people left and right. And that spirit, that if you can, you can still hear me. That spirit, that excitement is actually revealed in that Houdini movie with Tony Curtis. So for that reason, to catch maybe the spirit of Houdini, the romance of Houdini, that's a good source. However, if you're watching that movie to learn the truth about his life and his activities, no, you're actually more watching a book that would be written about him, like The Great Houdini from the 1950s and 40s, when they were still doing a lot of the stories. I think it's interesting in this book that they actually show us, they tell us that Houdini not only hired various ghostwriters, but that one of his ghostwriters was H.P. Lovecraft, who crafted amazing stories of nearly supernatural skill that were peppered into papers and building up the image of Houdini. I mean, H.P. Lovecraft, not bad if you want to have an interesting, somewhat supernatural story. Though I will mention that at the beginning of his act, especially in the later years when he's combating spiritualism, Houdini made it a point to say, and I will attempt to imitate his voice a bit. There is a recording. You can go online and find a recording of Houdini's voice. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Harry Houdini, and I am here to amaze, amuse, and mystify. But let me tell you all that nothing that I accomplish tonight is accomplished by the supernatural. No, indeed. Everything I do, from the magic to the escapes, to the revelation of fake mediums and psychics, all of that is done using a key, a special key, the most powerful key in the world, the human mind. And thus he declaimed supernatural powers in the very beginning. Anyway, if you haven't had a chance to read it, as an English teacher, a former now retired English teacher, the chapters are short. The characters are interesting. The story is pretty much chronological, so it's easy for anyone to follow. And it gives you an idea of the incredible influence that one vaudeville, circus, sideshow, then eventually major theater performer, movie maker, celebrity can have on the world. The life and afterlife of Harry Houdini, a life that now, we're almost at the 100-year mark of his death. In just 3 years, it'll be the anniversary of his death 100 years ago. His name is as well known today as perhaps it was, if not even more so than it was then. I know this because as a high school English teacher, there are many names that I would think, being the elderly statesman that I am, that the students would be sure to know, that they had no clue who I was referencing. But I could mention Houdini and everybody, regardless of the age in high school, they all know Houdini. No one says, who's that? They know. And that in itself is a great accomplishment. So with that said, there are probably some questions. I'll be happy to answer them. And with some of the names that you've read that are out there in the audience, if there's anything that I can't come up immediately with the answer for you, then I bet you have audience members who can help out in that regard.
Well, I will tell you that John Cox gave you the compliment that you did a really good Houdini imitation there a minute ago. So, but we do have a question.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. We have a question from Fred. Is there any record that Houdini ever had met or knew Nikola Tesla? They were both at the Chicago World's Fair, and Houdini went on to defend Tesla to a bunch of ladies during his time period and trying to uncover mediumship fraud. So do you know anything about that?
Of course, Houdini was a big name at the time. Tesla was a big name in scientific circles. Houdini was very interested in science, but only as a practical science. There's a book that I just recently acquired. I've been looking for it forever, and apparently it's now in reprint. I should have sent you this name too, but it's called Unlocking Adventure. And Unlocking Adventure is a book written by a New York locksmith who made his fame and fortune as a deep sea diver, underwater locksmith. There's not many people who are locksmiths who go to the safe on the bottom of the ocean to get the valuable property out of the safe to return for whatever. But he had a locksmith shop in New York. And I think it's chapter 9. He writes a lot about Harry Houdini as one of his customers who would come in and they would just talk locks. They would talk technology. They would talk difficulties. Having the locksmith whose job it is to open was, of course, of great interest to Harry Houdini. But he compliments Houdini on not only his bigger than life personality. He said, his personality, Houdini himself was 5'4", 5'5". In the book Unlocking Adventure, the locksmith talks about how his personality, he just seemed bigger than that. When Houdini spoke, it was an important fellow. But he maintained his interest in the technology regarding locks, and the technology, including things like electric locks and remote control devices and all those kinds of things that are such a part of our life today, because, you know, he was going to be facing challenges and he had to know how to escape. So I would be surprised if he did not know of Nikola Tesla, but I have never come across a conversation between them. So I'm sure Tesla would have known of him. I'm sure he would have known of Tesla. But as far as did they meet? No, but I think it would be an interesting conversation.
By the way, it must have been the Unlocking Adventure that John Cox said he didn't know Houdini was in it, but it makes sense why he sees that in the Houdini section in some bookshops. And we will add that to the list. Don't worry.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. Please feel free to put questions in the chat. I'm going to ask one of Dorothy Stratton's questions she sent me ahead of time. That first one. So what are the verifiable and undisputed facts of Houdini's life? She says, if there are any.
And the if there are any is a good point. Every new scholarly biography presents new questions. As I said, the Untold Story by Milburn Christopher really brought to the forefront this idea of, was he born in America or was he actually born? Everybody said it was 1874, though records in Budapest indicated it was March the 24th, and Houdini celebrated his birthday in 1874 on April the 6th. So there was about a 2-week difference between the records and the actual birthday. Plus, it didn't have Houdini leaving Budapest until he was 4 years old, as opposed to being born in Appleton. So that's always been a mystery. And there are people, I think the record now has been made clear enough that people know he was actually born. He had 3 older brothers at the time. I think his younger brother, Dash, it was Theo. And by the way, their names are interesting because pretty much all the brothers had these Hungarian, Jewish Hungarian names. His brother's name was Deso, but in Deso, his younger brother, but Deso became known as Theo, because Theo and Deso, there is no Deso in Anglo-American names, but Theo is close, so Theo. Houdini called his brother Dash, which you can see how if your name is Deso and Dash becomes Dash, and he becomes, his whole life it was his brother was named Dash. And Dash, and then the next brother who became the America's first what do you call the fellow who does x-rays, radiologist. His brother became America's first licensed radiologist. And then he had a sister, Gladys, after born here in America as well. Those are confirmed to have happened in America, but Houdini was actually apparently born in Hungary. So we sort of know that from the record, but there's still people who deny it. So we can't put that down as an absolute certain, because not everybody agrees, but it's pretty certain. We know one thing we know for certain is when he died. Now, people argue how and why he died, but when he died, he was in a Detroit hospital. He was under a doctor's care. We know his last words spoken to his brother Dash. All of that, it was in the paper. He lingered. He was basically after having surgery for a ruptured appendix. He had surgery. They fleshed him out as best they could with I guess you could call it the antibiotic at the time. It was a mercury solution. There were no antibiotics. So, you know, when I was a child, they would put mercurochrome, which is a mercury solution, on your cuts to disinfect. They did a similar fluid that they fleshed him out with, but the doctor said that the septicemia was so bad that he didn't expect Houdini to survive the night. And yet Houdini, being Houdini, he survived for 6 days against all odds. At one point, they thought, well, if he's lasted this long, he's probably going to survive. But he didn't. And he died on Halloween. Because if you're going to create a legend in the world of the supernatural, I mean, did he just hold on against all odds just for Halloween? I mean, since then, people have been conducting seances to try to get in touch with him on Halloween. You know, it's an annual event. Some of the greatest magicians in the world gather for the ceremony. His wife did it for 10 years. Bess attended seances for 10 years until finally she had the final seance. There's a recording of it that's available. They have the final seance. There's no response from Houdini. And so she puts out the candle and says, basically, 10 years is long enough to wait for any man. It's over. And off she goes with the rest of her relatively short life after that. So
we have another question.
So what other we know? I was going to say we know his show schedules because they were published in the papers and they had reviews. We know those things for sure. We know places he went, things he did. For the most part, there is a timeline that you can find that is firmly established, but some of the things everybody knows are not true, such as his bridge jump, which he did. I have photos in the books I was showing you earlier that show him doing bridge jumps. It was a way of drawing thousands of people to the riverside. He jumps into the water, escapes, manacled and all that. But there's the story from the movie in 1953 where he jumps into the Detroit River and he goes under the ice and he can't find his way to the surface and he's struggling for air beneath the ice and everyone thinks he's dead and they all go home, and then he miraculously manages to find the hole and climb out after everybody has left, and he heads home to his wife who thinks she's a widow. It's a very dramatic scene in the movie, and he talked about that. He talked about how it happened. He put it in a lot of his biographies about how it happened. Never happened. No, he dived into one river once with ice, but it didn't have sheets of ice. The reporter reported that the water was so cold there were little chunks of ice being seen here and there, and that was still impressive that a man would jump into really cold water, but no, swimming, looking for a hole in the ice, sucking air from the little gap between the water and the ice. No, that's just a little magical exaggeration.
Okay, so I'm going to get back to another question about the wife,
Sure.
but here's one that Houdini died in 1926, and he was so
Right.
popular. Why did it take so long, almost 30 years, for Hollywood to make a biopic of his life?
I don't know the backstage story of the Houdini movie. Houdini had made his own movies. He made, as I showed you, some DVDs of some of the films he did. But they were all silent. Most of them were serials, and they were all silent films. That was all passé, so that's not going to show up. A couple of years later, the Depression hits. Is there a market for a dead magician story during the Depression? And then World War II hits. There's lots of bravery. There are wartime spies. That doesn't seem the right time for a magic story, though there's a wonderful little movie about a guy going into makeup and pretending to be Japanese when he's not. But anyway, that's not really a magic tale. Maybe it just took a while for the time to be right. The early 1950s. We are approaching the 30th anniversary of his death. We've had 25 years since his death. There's a little distance there. The other people who may claim rights to the movies, like his brother and his wife, are all dead by that time. That could have had an effect on it. I can't say for certain that's a reason, but Hollywood being what it is, that's possibly a reason. But like I said, the movie they produced, it's most enjoyable and well worth a bag of popcorn and a nice soda and sit there and just enjoy the pure pleasure of it and don't believe a word of it.
So I want to get back to the wife, because one of Dorothy's questions was, what could you tell us about his wife and their marriage? And she said that it must have been a strange life for anyone to share with him.
Absolutely strange. Um, Bess Radner had as vivid as an imagination as her husband. And as this book points out, while the story Bess tells is that she's attending a party and Houdini is doing a trick and he actually accidentally spills acid on her dress. And she goes home and her mother is horrified that it's ruined a dress with acid, though the book does point out the question, what possible trick on earth would have a magician doing a show with acid on his magic table? Anyway, but that's her story. And that Houdini comes and brings her this beautiful handmade pink dress to replace her little party dress, carefully sewn by her own sweet mother, by his own sweet mother, to replace the dress that he damaged. And the two of them look into each other's eyes and are swept away on currents of romance. And in just a few days, they're married and whatever. That's the story she told in various versions. Very romanticized, he suggests in this book that she may have dated his first partner, Jacob Hyman, and then she may have also dated for a while his brother Dash. And then she finally got around to Houdini and dating him. She was actually a showgirl. She was a singer and dancer with the Flora Sisters that performed on the Coney Island boardwalk, just like Houdini and his brother did, the Houdini brothers, at that part of his show, that part of his life. And so let's say she could be as creative as anyone could be when it came to padding and making more interesting the story. She also said that since she was Roman Catholic and he was Jewish, that after they got married, after a whirlwind courtship, whether it was 3 weeks or 3 days, her mother never spoke to her for the next 12 years. I think it's interesting that 12 years later, he's going to hit the big time and have lots of money. And at that point, the mother-in-law is really interested in her and her son-in-law. But until he actually, got over working circuses and sideshows and making nothing, that when he actually hit the big time, then suddenly it was okay for her daughter to be married to somebody else. She did have, with a personality as big as Houdini's, she was always second place. Houdini always came first. Maybe the image of Houdini came second. I'm going to divorce those two. And then probably Bess came third. Maybe. There are other loves in his life. He loved his library. He loved his collection of books. There are horrible stories about what the lengths he went to get hold of some of the books he got. Some of the stories are just sort of cruel and sad of things he did to get what he wanted whenever he wanted it. But she would have put up with that. She was the costumer for his shows. She designed the costumes when they were working tent shows and side shows. She designed costumes and managed the girls on stage when he had the big illusion shows. She was always a part of it, though apparently, especially towards the end, she drank more and more. And eventually she'll die actually during World War II on a train going between Los Angeles and New York. She will die. I think it's a heart attack, probably induced as much as by her alcoholism as anything else. So it ends sort of a sad tale. I think it would be difficult to be married to somebody like him, though there is a wonderful story that I have to share about Bess. After Houdini's death, she's going through his papers and she finds love letters written to him by numerous women, many of whom she knew. And so she bundled up the love letters, wrapped them in ribbon, and invited all these women to her home. And when they arrived for a tea or whatever, she simply handed them their letters, and wished them a good day. It reminds me of a story about Jack Kennedy, President Kennedy. There was a dinner party he went to. Of course, his wife had arranged the seating and everything for the dinner party in the White House. And she put one of his mistresses to his left and one of his mistresses to his right. And she sat directly across the table from him. And the entire dinner, she looked at one and then she looked at him. She looked at the other and then she looked at him all night long. I know you did it. I know you did it. And you're not getting away with anything. She did that as well. Beth Houdini. Yeah.
Now, Larry, there's a comment here in the chat that says, if I'm not mistaken, you may have a relative of Beth's here today. So
Really?
Is there somebody? Please unmute your mic and let us know. Maybe not.
John, to everybody.
Hang on, I'm here.
Okay.
Hi there.
How
I
you
was
doing?
just reading about you in this book.
Yeah, no, I'm John Henson. I'm related on Betsy's side of the family.
Oh, okay.
Betsy,
Oh, okay.
okay, Betsy and my grandmother were sisters.
Gotcha. Okay.
Well, thank
Wow.
you.
Are there any family stories that were handed down?
Yes, my grandmother used to make Houdini's costumes
Right.
when she used to open up the sleeves to the arms for the straitjackets.
Oh, okay.
And
So
my
there was some
grandfa-
alteration.
Yes, and my grandfather built the props with Houdini.
Oh, good.
Yep.
It was a family affair.
Yes.
Wow.
Well,
Very
Because-
neat.
Yes, Betsy was the oldest and my grandmother was the youngest of kids
Right.
of 12 years.
Was there any talk about the relationship, about any tension there between Bess and Harry, or was that sort of just not discussed?
Not discussed.
That would make sense. Most families don't dwell on such things as that.
Yes.
And they were married for decades.
32
marriage.
years. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's very neat.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you for joining and thank you for talking, John. That's great.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Larry, here's an interesting question for you. Diego asks, okay, so what differences in reasons for being so interested or in some cases obsessed with Houdini did you see in the book? And are there any differences or similarities in others devoted to like Elvis or Sinatra or something?
I think so. In the book, I think one of the nice things it points out, for example, in the story of Dorothy Dietrich, he's doing a chapter about that brief period in Houdini's life when Houdini's 12 years old, he runs away from home. There were a lot of, his father had lost his job as a rabbi. They were struggling to make ends meet. His father, who had this magnificent library of law and religious texts, because he also had a law degree from Hungary as well. His father had been forced to sell most of his books just to keep his family. Because remember, here's a guy with 7 children, and little or no work. When they finally get to New York, he ends up working in a tie cutting factory, though that's maybe a little disingenuous. They did cut ties in this cloth factory in New York, but they also made Torahs and other religious clothing and Hanukkah, all the paraphernalia of the faith were also made there. And I would assume his father was probably more involved in that than he was involved in cutting ties, which they also did. But so Houdini's 12 years old. He runs away from home, ends up as far away as Texas from by that time Madison, Wisconsin. And he's taken in by a family, and then he's reunited with his family, and he returns, and they all move to New York and all that. But this little girl he writes about, she basically is from an abusive family, and she runs away from home when she's about the same age. in some ways, you know, when you read that story, having had a similar life experience, you go, this person's just like me. I can really relate to them because their life is so much like mine. And I think a lot of people with such a varied life, a lot of people became fascinated by him because of that. In my own case, when I started reading about him, is because I wanted to learn how he did all that stuff. And I was very fortunate that Houdini was very forthcoming. You know, we talk about the secrets of Houdini were never revealed. Well, those of us in the magic community know the secrets. Many of them were revealed. Now there are some that are still in debate, but the secrets were revealed. He passed along secrets, not just to help the fraternity of magicians, which probably was low on his set of prerequisites, but he was hounded by imitators who wanted to copy his show and work for a lot cheaper than he would work as a top name, top of the bill act. And how did he sabotage them? Well, each year he would adapt and change his show. And a lot of the tricks he had in last year's show, he would reveal the secrets. So that if a magician was a year behind him trying to copy his last year's show, the audience, anybody who was interested, had already seen the secrets. They know how it worked. So he basically cut the knees out from under competition by revealing secrets. He also had several books written, probably ghostwritten, many probably by Walter Gibson, about how to escape from chains, how to escape from ropes, how to do basic magic. Gibson actually edited a book called Houdini on Magic, where he talks about some of Houdini's favorite tricks that he himself had revealed. What was the question? I rambled on. I forgot what the question was.
I'm trying to think. I'm not sure where we started with that. Oh, about the fans, like similarities to fans with Elvis, or yeah.
So people would like me. I wanted to learn how to do the tricks. I'm going to study him. In fact, I am happy to say that I learned to escape from a straitjacket. Houdini taught me how to escape from a straitjacket. I took his film, The Master Mystery, and he escapes from a straitjacket on the video, which on DVD you can do frame by frame. And I watched him escape from a straitjacket, frame by frame, strapped into a straitjacket, copying his moves, move for move, and he taught me, including that one part of the escape, where when I saw him do it on the video, I said, no, the human body doesn't bend that way. Well, if you practice enough, it does. And then you can escape from a straitjacket. So there are people like me who have studied him because, I mean, he's the great the name in magic. And so if you can do something similar to what he does, that makes you look better. Then there are people who just like the romance of it, the mystery of it, the questioning of it. And in his book, he talks about, Culleton, for example, Patrick Culleton, who writes The Key, this wonderful book, this unusual book, this collection of all things Houdini, and publishes a very small number of them. So they're very hard to find. That's one of the quests that goes throughout the book, is he's searching for a copy of The Key, and he finally has a chance to see one. So there are people that are interested in that. And then for a lot of people my age, which is in the late 60s, there is the Tony Curtis movie that you just wanted to be that romantic character escaping from the impossible. I mean, there's a whole psychological thing there about escaping from your troubles, escaping from danger, facing your fears and overcoming them. He tapped into some amazing psychological things in a lot of people. So I think it would be very easy to become as obsessed with him as you would with an Elvis or with any other famous artist. And he was an artist. He may have been sometimes a real SOB, but he was also an artist. And thus we're talking about him almost 100 years later on Zoom.
We've got some more questions here. So is it true that Houdini's assistants kept his secrets until their deaths?
Yes. Yes, and we know this because one of his assistants, who passed away fairly recently, she would attend magic conventions, and she would attend gatherings of magicians, and as a paid speaker, and was in great demand. And she would talk about Houdini. She'd talk about his personality. She'd talk about the tricks they did and the illusions they performed, and give hints at this, that, or the other. But I know of no one who specifically started, okay, here's how everything worked. That would have been breaking a trust. And now, when he died, he willed all of his magic equipment to his brother Theo. He willed his collection of theater and magic books to the Library of Congress, and basically his home and his money to his wife. And there were other people as well, but those were the bulk of his estate. And of course, Theo knew the tricks. Theo, he had worked with Theo as the Houdini brothers before he teamed up. He dumped Theo to marry Bess, and he much preferred Bess's legs to Theo's legs when it came to the show. So Theo knew the secrets. But I have, and Theo had an assistant who maybe shared a bit more than he should have after Theo's death. But apart from him, I don't know of any record of Houdini's assistants that I think he would have been quite stern if someone had tried to do that to him.
Okay, I'm going to throw a quick thing in here. Why don't we know about Theo? Like we know about
well, Theo Dash, like I said, after Houdini started with the partner Jacob Hyman, then they weren't making any money, and from all reports, including the report in this book, I keep referring back to the book, including the report in this book, they not only didn't make any money, but they probably weren't all that particularly good. But they had bought this one really neat escape trick, and so when Hyman got tired of it and left the show, Houdini recruited his brother Theo, or Dash, to be the other Houdini brother until he married Bess, and then they became a partnership. But when his brother left him, he continued on doing magic as well. He changed his name to Hardin. Instead of Houdini, he was Hardin. Hardin, the great Hardin. He was, and they did something really neat. In the world of professional wrestling, my older brother worked for a time as a professional wrestler. And so I've been backstage at professional wrestling matches. And it's really interesting to hear the preparations that go into the creating of an entertaining show for the audience. Because you have to hate somebody, you have to love somebody, you have to be, on the edge of your seat, will the bad guy win, and all that. Well, Hardin and Houdini did the same thing. When they appeared in the same town together, they appeared as rivals. No one knew that Hardin was the brother, because Hardin was this big, tall guy, and Houdini was this little, short, muscular guy. And you wouldn't have, if you see them pictured side by side, there's not a huge resemblance. Nobody knew they were brothers. And so there'd be these taunts back and forth. Your show's no good. Your show's no good. Da, da, da. Your audience needs to come out me. And they got press coverage by the Battle of the Magicians. And then people would turn out for both shows, and they'd both make a lot of money. There is one really adorable story, though, about Houdini dangling off a building doing his great escape act, the straitjacket escape, hanging upside down from the roof of a building. And as he's doing the escape, Hardin sends his staff through with flyers to the Hardin show, as if the guy escaping was actually Hardin. Houdini didn't talk to him for a while after that. But so there was some friendly rivalry. But no, Hardin did not have the one thing that Houdini had, that bulldog spirit that I think was contagious with the audience. He did a show. He did his tricks. He was good. Hardin actually developed the straitjacket escape the way Houdini performed it. When Houdini first invented the straitjacket escape, Houdini did the escape behind an enclosure. He would be all strapped up and then go inside a cloth cabinet and make his escape. And see the curtains rattling and all that. And then he would emerge. And he got a note from his brother saying, I've been doing it in full view of the audience. And they liked it a lot better if I do it in full view, so I can see how hard it is to get out. And so Houdini began to do that. So they shared, they helped each other. But there was no stories of the great Houdini in this horrible situation, or confronting this person and backing them down, or on the verge of death. None of those stories affected Houdini. He was a showman, but he was an average showman, not an extraordinary showman.
Hey, Larry, if it's okay with you, John Cox has asked to maybe unmute and say something for a minute. He is another Houdini person.
Yeah.
Hi, Larry.
Hi.
I just wanted to jump on and say hi. And thank you for doing this particular book, which I really love this book. I think it's a great book, not just because I'm in it, which was a complete surprise to me, by the way, but also the approach to it. I love the split nature. And Joe, he didn't know anything about Houdini going into this, and he learned about Houdini through people that love Houdini. And just, he's a very good journalist, so him chronicling his adventures are terrific. You go into Copperfield's museum and all that. So, and it's a very accurate book. He really goes into some of the more interesting, nuanced discussions. In a way, you learn a lot about Houdini in a very entertaining, quick read. So bravo for selecting this book. A pleasant surprise that you were doing this one.
Good. Thank you very much.
Let's see, we have a few more questions. Thank you, John. So Stephen said that he had to step away, but nobody's talked about this. One of the things he liked about the book are the pictures on the inside, behind the cover, and the back of the book.
This is in Scranton, beautiful downtown Scranton, the Houdini Museum, done by Dorothy Dietrich, who's one of the characters I talked about, the 12-year-old girl who ran away from home and started a career, became very successful. This year, one of the characters I'm performing is Robert Ripley. And she's made her own way into the wonderful world of Believe It or Not for catching bullets with her teeth. So it's not many people have done that, that's for sure. Houdini never did. Houdini was going to catch a bullet in his teeth, and the leading old-time magician of his age, the great Keller, wrote to him and said, "Dear boy, we can't afford to lose you to the magical world. And so many magicians have died catching a bullet with their teeth that please don't do that trick." And Houdini didn't do it, but she did. And she's opened the Houdini Museum in Scranton. There we go, Houdini Museum. And on the back, a gathering for the Houdini seance. I believe this is, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe this is the Magic Castle. And they do a Houdini seance each year that really the leading shining stars of magic appear and sit around the table and try to contact. It is like an annual ritual on Halloween or near Halloween to try to contact the spirit of Houdini on the anniversary of his death. And of course it hasn't, because as Houdini says, wait a minute, as Houdini said, yeah, here I am, on the t-shirt, "Do the dead speak to the living?" And his answer was no. And so far he's confirmed it by his absence.
So we have a lot of people on here that are interested in Houdini or a relative in the family here, but sure. We do a Living History summer event for those of you who don't know. And so this question is going to speak to that. So Dorothy Stratton says, after all you've said about Houdini, would you say he was a nice man or a not nice man? And how will you portray him this summer? Will he be a sympathetic character?
When I portray Houdini, I will tell, as I'm performing, because basically the Houdini show consisted of 3 acts. There was the magic portion of the show, the escape portion of the show, and then the exposure of fraudulent mediums and psychics. And I will sort of the outline, and because we only have 30 to 40 minutes of the time, I will do those 3 portions. Houdini will perform magic, which I think you will find most enjoyable. Houdini will perform challenge escapes with members of the audience, and Houdini will also present the secrets of the psychics that they're still using to this very day to defraud people to believe in things that it's a way of picking pockets in a very difficult time. Anyway, all those are parts of the show. I will speak as best I can as Houdini spoke, not just trying to capture the timbre of his voice, but also telling the stories that he would tell, which after having heard this book talk, I will be lying through much of the show out of my teeth. All right. There will be many times in the discussion and the story of his life, as he's unweaving it when doing magic and telling the story of his life and doing the escapes and telling the story of his life, that he will be leading you astray. But that's why we have the question and answer session too. Though, if you were to challenge him in the question and answer session, he might be cruel and put you in your place. So you might want to save any kinds of those challenging questions till the out of character question and answer, at which time I will tell you the truth as best we know it. But no, Houdini, the performer, I think the audience will laugh. The audience will be surprised. George Frine was telling me that he was sitting watching the Houdini show years ago, and he said there's a little boy sitting next to his father, sitting in front of him, and the little boy kept turning to his dad and said, "How did he do that? How did he do that?" Every time something happened, "How did he do that? Wow!" And I'm hoping that that's what the audiences in Houdini's time did. Now, Houdini would do some escapes where he would be locked up and tied up and placed in a cabinet and hold the audience's attention spellbound for 30, 40, 45 minutes, an hour, hour and a half, and then come out covered in sweat, but he escaped and the audience would be on their feet cheering. I don't think that would sell too well with a modern audience. So I promise you the escapes I perform will be hopefully much more rapid. But yes, I will be true to his character, but maybe a touch funnier. When Houdini was an actor, and he received reviews. If you have a chance to see his films, like I said, I invite you to go to YouTube and pull up Houdini, and you'll see not only stories of Houdini, but you'll also see films made by Houdini. And you see him acting. As one critic said, well, Houdini's acting is very sincere. Houdini thought that was the greatest compliment. He would show people the clipping. I act sincerely. When actually the use of the word sincere there was sort of like what we use in the South when we say, bless his heart. He's an actor, bless his heart. It was that kind of a compliment. But you can see that for yourself when you see his films. Yeah.
Well, I don't see any more questions, but this has been, I have to say, the most interesting night we've had in terms of having audience members who connect to the character we're talking about. So thank you all for attending. That took me by surprise, but a pleasant surprise. Does anyone have any last questions they want to ask? You can stick them in the chat. You can quickly unmute and toss something out there. Maybe not. So I waited till the end to say this, but this is going to be our last book talk. We've been doing these for 3 years, and we've decided to try something different next year. Next year will be our 25th anniversary. And so we decided to try something different. So I just want, for those of you who have been kind of coming around month after month after month, This is going to be our last one for a while, but we, along with Houdini on YouTube, you will be able to find this book talk and all of our other book talks. We have an Ashland Chautauqua YouTube channel that you can, when you're Googling or searching for Houdini, you can also search for us and see all of the different characters, because we've been dealing with Meriwether Lewis. We've been dealing with Jackie Cochran, who was this fascinating female aviator. We've been dealing with Polly Murray, lawyer, Episcopal priest, activist. We had Samuel Bellamy, fascinating pirate stories, and then tonight Houdini. And they will all be coming to Ashland, Ohio. If you want to come from LA and New Jersey and all these different places to little old Ashland, Ohio in July, you can come and see these performances. And Saturday night, our final night, will be our Houdini performance. He will close down the week. Thank you all for coming, and thank you, Larry, for sharing lots of great stories. Thank you, John and John, both for chiming in. We really appreciate it. When you leave tonight, there will be a survey that will pop up, and we'd appreciate it if you would fill that out. It helps us gather data for grant writing. We're a nonprofit on a tight budget, so we appreciate any help we can get on that. And we will send a follow-up email tomorrow. I think it'll go out, but we'll include all those books. It sounds like some of you don't need that bibliography because you're in some of those books, but some of you might want that list. So we'll be sure and send that out. So if you want to do more reading beyond the book we were talking about tonight, you've got a lot of good leads. Anything you want to share to close things off?
There was one more question from Diego, and it was, how do you see Houdini's name, myth, and fame continuing in the future, Larry?
Thank you.
Since what he covers are these universal things, facing one's fears, becoming untrapped, unstuck, whether it's trapped in a what seems to be a thankless dead-end job, or trapped in a relationship with someone, or trapped, there's so many ways, trapped in traffic in Los Angeles. I mean, whatever it might be. I think the appeal of the jailbreaker, the man no lock can hold, I think that will continue on. I can't see him not being still around, still mentioned 100 years from now, on his 200th birthday, or death day, as the case may be. It's just such a good story, and it covers a basic human thing. Now, is it possible someone else will come along between now and then who touches on those same things even better? Possibly so, but we've had many people who've tried to be Houdini since Houdini, and there's still only one Houdini. So only time will tell.
I'm glad you caught that question, Star, because that actually ended up being a nice way to close things off. Yeah. Let's see, there's one more. Let me make sure it's okay. It's the survey. The survey is here in the chat, but it'll also pop up when you leave. Well, thank you all for joining. We really appreciate it. And if you want to come to Ashland, Ohio this summer, July, it's July 12th through the 15th. We would love to see you. Thanks again, Larry. And I hope you all have a good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.